date is November the 11th, 1975, and Gough Whitlam prepares to give a statement to Parliament proving the identity of a CIA agent who had been leasing the property of the leader of the opposition Country Party, Doug Anthony. The CIA publicly denied that Anthony's tenant was in the CIA and threatened to break security relations with Australia after Whitlam had earlier accused the Country Party of being funded by the CIA. Before Whitlam prepared to take the stand and make the most daring foreign policy move any Australian had ever made, he made an effort to visit the Governor-General John Kerr to propose a half-Senate election. This would resolve the issue of the Liberal-controlled Senate blocking the efforts of the Labor-controlled House. To Whitlam's shock, as he enters Kerr's office, he finds the opposition leader Malcolm Fraser waiting for him. Unable to piece together what's actually going on here, Kerr spells it out for him. Kerr hands Whitlam a letter containing the news Whitlam was dreading. Effective immediately, Gough Whitlam was fired as the Prime Minister of Australia and was to be replaced by Malcolm Fraser. As we enter the new year, we begin with the most dramatic chapter in Australia's political history. These next two episodes of Labor, Liberal and Lies will look at the rise and fall of Whitlam's reformist regime and those involved in the plot to take down our 21st Prime Minister. Today you'll learn all about the scandals that plagued his term and a half in office.
Well, may we say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General.
Came from. By 1972, Labor had been out of office since 1949, when Menzies surprisingly beat Chifley. Since then, Menzies had repeatedly beaten the anti-socialist drum to devastating effect. However, since Menzies' retirement, the Libs had cycled between leaders and until 1969 supported the unpopular Vietnam War. So when Whitlam ran his It's Time campaign in 1972, Australia was actually ready to welcome the government playing an increased role in the economy and providing all sorts of social benefits that Australians hadn't yet seen. And so Whitlam got to work right away in providing increased social welfare. Firstly, the Whitlam government sought to introduce Medibank, what we today would call Medicare. This was something he'd campaigned hard on. You see, under the Libs, the government provided health insurance for what were defined as vulnerable groups such as migrants and the unemployed. Whitlam argued that this unfairly impacted low-income earners and that a better system would be for the government to provide universal healthcare. Initially, Labor proposed that this be funded by a 1.35% income tax, but this failed to get through the Senate. During their second term, it eventually got through Parliament with an agreement to use other funding. Whitlam also went on to provide free university and a system called Legal Aid, in which citizens could gain access to a lawyer funded by the government if they were deemed to have an income too low to afford legal representation. Another really important of Whitlam's welfare reforms that often goes unspoken about was his proposal to transfer control over wages and prices from state government to federal government. The reason for this was that one of Whitlam's key priorities was to raise wages for average Australians. Even though this didn't get through, it signalled Whitlam's intent. By reducing tariffs and by setting pace for the private sector by increasing the wages of the federal public sector, Whitlam actually saw wage growth reach nearly 33%. Now, yes, the early 70s saw bad inflation, but wage growth still significantly beat the rising inflation, which was at 17%. The Whitlam era was also the era in which Australian workers had the highest share of the nation's wealth. Not only that, but Whitlam introduced a whole lot of important social policies too. God Save the Queen was scrapped as the national anthem and was replaced by Advance Australia Fair. By the way, my subscriber question for today is what should actually be the nation's national anthem? And Whitlam also scrapped knighthoods for something called the Order of Australia. The message to Britain was clear. Under Whitlam, Australia was moving towards its own national identity. Whitlam also abolished capital punishment, though no one had been executed since 1967, and set free every so-called draft dodger who had refused conscription during the Vietnam War. Finally, Whitlam also ended the Australian government's policy of assimilation, in which the government sought to anglicise Indigenous Australians. Instead, the Whitlam government adopted a policy of self-determination in which Indigenous Australians had the right to determine their own outcomes, i.e. dress how they want, speak native dialects, and live remote lifestyles if they wished to. To ensure that last point could actually happen, this actually meant a small degree of land rights too. So the Whitlam regime moved swiftly to transform Australia's economy. And looking back now, a lot of these reforms appear to be well ahead of their time. So things were smooth sailing for the Whitlam government, right? Well, not even close. So it's no secret that the CIA absolutely hated Whitlam, and so it's really worth asking the question, how did we go from having LBJ and Harold Holt as best mates to Nixon and Kissinger despising the new Prime Minister? Some say that it was because Whitlam enacted socialist policies in the Cold War era, but that's just completely incorrect. Remember, the 70s was the era of détente, and Nixon made an ally out of Mao. So clearly then, it had very little to do with Whitlam's domestic policy and a whole lot more to do with his foreign policy. Now, it's worth noting that Whitlam actually did a lot that aligned with Nixon's foreign policy. As the opposition leader, Whitlam went to meet with the PRC as Nixon was only planning his secret visit to see Mao. When in office, Whitlam then expanded Australia's presence in Asia, visiting many of the Asia-Pacific nations and ultimately ending Australia's recognition of Taiwan to instead recognise Mao's China as the true China. Whitlam also made an unpopular decision to support Indonesia's annexation of East Timor. Now, Whitlam later played down his support, but at the time, his argument was that it was too small to be independent and would actually benefit from being incorporated into Indonesia. It's also worth noting that his government formalised independence for Papua New Guinea from Australia in 1975. But Whitlam's US woes actually began in 1972 when he wrote a letter to Nixon urging him to reconsider the nature of Kissinger's Christmas bombings in North Vietnam. Now, Whitlam's criticisms were actually pretty mild, mainly critiquing the effectiveness in bringing Vietnam to the negotiating table. Suffice to say that Nixon and Kissinger's response was disgust at what it considered its loyal ally. Nixon and Kissinger then decided to freeze out Whitlam and pause all communication with the Australian Prime Minister. In 1973, when Kissinger was asked about Whitlam's upcoming visit, he said that Whitlam needed to be kept in line. But there's even more to the story than just that. In 1972, George Street in Sydney was bombed by a right-wing Croatian separatist group, and in 1973, the Yugoslavian Prime Minister was visiting Australia. Australia was concerned for the safety of the Yugoslav leader, and so this fell well within the remit of ASIO. Now, Whitlam's Attorney General, Lionel Murphy, felt as though ASIO was only concerned with communist left-wing terrorism and gave very little attention to right-wing extremism such as the George Street bombings. Murphy wanted to send a message that basically said, hey, get on top of the right-wing terror while we have the Yugoslav Prime Minister out. And he ordered a raid on ASIO's Melbourne offices. Now, that would annoy the US in of itself, but especially considering ASIO and the CIA shared much intelligence, and the CIA kind of viewed ASIO as an extension of itself. But yet there's still even more to the US's hatred of Whitlam. America owns a surveillance base in Australia called Pine Gap. Now, the treaty to establish this base was signed in 1966 with a lease until 1977. If Whitlam were to serve 2 full terms, he could potentially have chosen not to renew America's Pine Gap lease. The interesting thing was that Whitlam gave mixed messages about what could happen. To the Americans, he assured them that he had every intention of renewing their lease, but then in Parliament, he declared that no foreign nation should have a spy base on Australian soil. So, Whitlam had seriously concerned the CIA, and these were the words of the CIA's Chief of Counterintelligence, James Jesus Angleton.
And when we saw this Whitlam government come into power, and this Attorney General moving in, barging in, we were deeply concerned as to the sanctity of the information.
Won a majority in the House of Representatives, but the Senate was divided. 28 seats to Liberal, 28 seats to Labor, and 2 independents who were more sympathetic towards the Libs. This was the exact situation that Whitlam wanted to avoid, as he now had no majority in the Senate. But it was to get worse. When someone in the lower house resigns, we have a by-election where only that electorate votes for a new representative. However, the Senate is represented by the state rather than by local electorate. So when a senator resigns, the state parliament actually gets to pick a new senator to replace them. I'm sure you can see the issue here. Surely each premier would just put forward someone from their own party. Now, it was convention to not do this because it was seen as poor form, but the Whitlam debacle actually later triggered a constitutional reform to make it illegal. Now, Lionel Murphy, who we met earlier, decided to resign, and the Liberal New South Wales Premier replaced him with an independent, Cleaver Bunton. At the same time, one of those independent senators joined the Libs. So now the Senate had 30 Liberal senators, 2 independent senators, and 29 Labor senators. Follow me so far? Well, to make matters worse, another Labor senator, Bertie Milner, died in office. He was from Queensland, and the super conservative Country Party Premier, Joh Bjelke-Petersen, who we're going to focus on in a later episode, appointed a person called Albert Field. Field was a member of the Labor Party, but wasn't a Labor-approved politician. So why did Petersen pick him? Well, Field hated Whitlam and would happily side with the Libs to take him down. It's like when Obi-Wan technically donned a red lightsaber in the Clone Wars. So now the situation was perilous for Whitlam. He was completely outgunned in the Senate and relied on Malcolm Fraser to permit his Liberal Party to allow legislation to get through the upper house. However, Fraser knew it would look terrible to prevent Whitlam from passing laws considering he was elected, and said he'd only block Whitlam's agenda if the Labor Party committed a reprehensible act. At every minor scandal, Fraser was asked if this was the reprehensible act he was waiting for, but it wouldn't actually come until 1975. Now, throughout Whitlam's second term, his Minister for Resources, Rex Connor, had a bold plan to nationalise Australia's mines so that Australians would effectively own its own resources. Because we're not the Soviet Union, we were never going to do this by force, and so instead the government needed to buy majority shares in these private companies. With inflation running so high, the government couldn't just print off money to make the purchase, and so instead Rex Connor went looking for a mega loan, and he found it with a Pakistani banker called Tirath Kemlani. Kemlani didn't have the money himself, but he had the connections to get the loan and said that he could source Connor with a $4 billion loan. Now, so far, there's nothing illegal about this at all, but Parliament does require such loans to go through the Loan Council, and it's unusual not to go through the Treasury Department for such a big sum of money. Ultimately, Treasurer Cairns approved the loan but didn't go through the Loan Council and lied to Parliament about taking the loan. The loan actually fell through as Kemlani's provider was none other than King Faisal of Saudi Arabia. But in coincidental timing, he was assassinated by his nephew before the loan went through. When news of what happened got back to Parliament, Cairns was left with egg on his face as he actually lied to the Parliament. Whitlam sacked Jim Cairns as Treasurer and ordered Rex Connor to pull the plug on the loan. Connor was really attached to his nationalisation idea and secretly kept going with the loan. Whitlam had told Parliament that the loan was off, and so when news broke that Connor hadn't given up, Labor was in real trouble. Whitlam sacked Connor, and it was grim. At best, Whitlam couldn't control his cabinet. At worst, he knowingly lied to the Parliament. Kemlani came out to Australia claiming that Whitlam was in on it the whole time and was actually interrogated by rising star in the Liberal Party, John Howard. However, Kemlani couldn't really provide any real proof of anything. Nonetheless, Fraser had his reprehensible circumstances that he was looking for, and he ordered his Liberal Party to block Whitlam's budget. The next few weeks would be the craziest in Parliament's history.
Political sensation in the national capital. The Prime Minister, Mr. Whitlam, has been sacked. The opposition leader, Mr. Fraser, is the new Prime Minister of Australia.
Sir John also asked Mr. Fraser to guarantee supply. He has done that, and only a matter of half an hour ago, the Senate passed the two appropriation bills.
Once again, there will be a Labor government chosen by the people of Australia.
Now, we've just received news there's a press conference going on in Canberra right at the moment. We'll endeavour to take you there live.
How does it feel being the first Prime Minister since Federation to have been sacked by the Crown? And
I'm the first for 200 years since George III sacked Lord North.
Is this an affront to the Constitution of this country? Or was it just a stroke of good luck for Mr. Fraser? Thanks very much. Just wanted to know.
Now that there's going to be an election, what chance do you think he has?
Oh, I don't think he'd have much. No.
I'm not actually terribly interested in politics. I think it's crazy. It's completely unexpected.
He's been fired.
Fired, wonderful.
What do you think of it?
I'm amazed.
It places on record that it is a reality now, no longer a theory. The Governor-General can dismiss the Prime Minister who holds a majority in the directly elected House.
Good evening, and I'm...
Hello everyone and welcome to this very important press conference for Australian Renewables. Now put your hands together for Anthony Albanese, Adam Banton, Chris Bowen. Today we're investing even more money into renewable energy. Thank you very much. Mr. Albanese, what do you say to the crazy cookers that think this isn't a reliable source of energy? Please, I'll take this one, Albo. Look, as the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, I can say with absolute certainty this technology is reliable Oh no, Chris Bowen! Get him an ambulance! There's no time! Quick, get in the Tesla! We can rebuild him. We have the technology. Albo, what's going on? You're going to live, and you'll be 100% renewable. Oh, wow. So like the $6 million man, well, more like the $6 trillion man, but that's a small price to achieve this. The net zero bot. Zero bot. Do you get it? Chris? Do you get it? Chris? Oh, look at him go! He's so sustainable. Oh, great. Clouds? What are we supposed to do now? Don't worry. We'll just switch him over to battery storage. All right, I'm back. Thanks a lot. Out of juice already? Okay, we'll have to switch over to auxiliary wind power. All right, look at this. I'm back. Harnessing the power of the wind. Now, let's go save the world. No, maybe we should just try on a day that's not so cloudy and still. Ah, damn it! What are we supposed to do now? Bowen keeps blacking out. Don't worry, Adam Bant. Luckily, I installed this little backup plan. A combustion engine. Oh, where are we supposed to get something to burn? Something we almost have an endless supply of. Taxpayer money! I feel renewed! Excellent. I think we're ready to roll out the net zero bot and make the transition. Yep, and if all else fails, all we have to do is stuff more money into Bowen. Let's go! We did it, Albo! The whole country's officially transitioned. All our homes and businesses, our hospitals, and all our critical utilities, all powered by the net zero bot. And all it took was an endless supply of public money. What's going on? Oh, no! No! Where's my taxpayer money?
Oh, good work, Elbow. You've officially killed the economy and left us all without power. What a bloody mess.
Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Senator Hanson, but I guess it's not like anyone predicted this exact scenario happening.
I did. I constantly warned you about how much money you were burning to keep this stupid net zero bot thing alive.
Oh, but we had no alternative.
Yes, you did. Here.
I feel so reliable!
Well, that's a first. Elbow, you take this coal and you use it to give Australia the cheap and reliable power it needs.
Oh, but what are we supposed to do with all this taxpayer money?
You could invest some of it into something that's actually viable, like nuclear power.
Oh, yeah?
But whatever you do, please stop shoving taxpayer money up Chris Bowen's clacker.
Authorised by D. Huxium for Pauline Hanson's One Nation Brisbane.